The age-old question. Whether you've grown up hearing and seeing prejudice and hate towards Gypsies, a racial slur for Romani people, or you're just now finding out about us for the first time and made the mistake of opening up a social media comment section just to see some of the most hateful rhetoric you've ever seen in your life. Trust me, I've been there. And you may have thought to yourself, why is this happening? Why are these people so hated? Now you may have heard various explanations about this by Gadje, non-Roma, on why this is occurring. Some of them will try to justify it, some of them will fall into various stereotypes and myths about Romani people, and some of them, to various degrees of success, will try to defend Romani people. However, there's never really a Romani perspective on why all of this is going on. And that's what I'm here for. Davin Bachtale, my name is Florian, and today I'm going to be giving you a Romani perspective on why this is all going on. And joining me today will be Dr. Magda Matake, who is a Romani scholar who studies anti-Roma racism, a professor at Harvard University and the leader of their Roma Studies program, and an author who is just about to release her new book, The Permanence of Anti-Roma Racism, on this exact very topic. So who better to ask? Now, this hate is nothing new. It's actually deeply rooted in history.
I argue in the book that the origins of anti-Roma racism are to be found in the Middle Ages and the early modern period. So basically in the system of slavery in these peripheries known as the Romanian principalities or the principalities of Moldavia and Wallachia, but also in the European empires and their politics of expulsions, entry bans, killings, and violence against incoming Romani. What I'm saying is that slavery, entry bans, and expulsions were institutionalized and thus organized from top down. But all these forms of systematic exploitation and violence needed to be socially, morally, religiously justified because a sovereign, a philosopher, an artist could not promote virtues and later rights for white people who are justifying their violence against those they oppress. So they didn't want to see themselves as uncivilized. They were the civilized. And therefore, they had to invent a lot of things about those they oppress.
And a lot of this hate simply comes from people not understanding our culture. There is very little Romani representation in media and knowledge production, in schools especially. So people are left to their own myths and stereotypes when thinking about Romani people. It's very rare that you'll see people having conversations, full-on conversations with Romani people to really understand how we are truly like. And this lack of communication, this lack of media representing Romani people, this lack of education about Romani culture is causing these problems.
I'm talking about politics, but also knowledge production, culture, the media, as you mentioned, and many other tools and means. There's these harmful narratives that we face today, I argue, that are deeply rooted in history and they are infused with intentions, motivations, and meanings that serving those in power. So therefore, the naturalization of the myths of Roma criminality or Romani laziness, Romani violence, Romani opulence, and much more has long been more powerful than the reality and the unicity of each Romani individual.
Now, oftentimes when you hear hate towards Romani people, you often see a phrase as they do this, they do that, they are this type of way. Romani people are always referred to as a collective, this term of collective punishment, as if we all share one single mind. Romani people do not get to be our own unique individuals that are judged by our own merits. For example, recently in Slovenia, a Romani man was charged with a crime. Because of this, Slovenia enacted the Šutar law, anti-Roma legislation directed at the entire Romani community, as if we had all committed this crime.
So you and I do not necessarily exist through our characteristics in the eyes of God. We exist through these collective images that they have constructed against us to justify their oppression and their violence. That's hohaimata, as I call it in Romani, which means basically gajikane untruths or gajikane lies, is a tool of difference, but is also a tool of hierarchy between Gaja and Roma, because we are not talking just about stereotypes. There is a very clear social hierarchy that Europeans have established between these categories of people.
The enslavement of Romani people in Europe for around 500 years in a system of chattel slavery where Romani people were treated as property has had a huge impact on Romani communities. Even to this day, However, this slavery is never even talked about, though it really didn't happen that long ago, and Romani people are still facing the consequences of this to this day. Non-Romani people are seeing these consequences of slavery, however, they don't have the necessary context behind them.
And I guess the big question is why? And one of the main reasons is that the educational system in Romania didn't include this important part of our shared history in the textbooks until recently. And still now it is only an elective subject in schools. And there are no sites of memory that mention it. And I'm sure that when you travel to Romania, you look around and you cannot really see something that can remind all of us about this painful history. But yet when I started to learn about it, I quickly realized that the village where I was born and raised was in an area hit by enslavement. At the same time, I also had little knowledge about our family history. So essentially in the book, I talk about my great grandmother, Maria, her husband, Marin, who legally married in 1906. And I write in the book about their marriage certificate that we found in the archives and that refer to them as emancipated Romanians. So essentially in the language of those days, what that means was that they were people from enslaved Romani families, either freed individuals or descendants of former so-called slaves. Another document includes the story of my great grandmother, Uța, who was born in 1852, so during slavery, and most probably she was born as an enslaved child. And we also have information about her husband, Nicolae, who was born in 1848, the year of the European Spring. It is pretty remarkable for me. I mention in the book, this work is really a labor of love for my ancestors, for the ancestors that I never knew, for the ancestors whose pains and hunger and resistance are imprinted in me in so many ways.
A common explanation that you'll get for this hate is that Romani people are a racial minority. We are an Indian origin brown ethnic group that's living in Europe, a majority white society. And while that is definitely a huge part of it, you have to understand that there are Romani people of various different phenotypes that look every which way. However, they still experience this racism. That's why it's important to understand the concept of racialization, that essentially Romani has become its own race.
Skin color, as you know, is a global social marker for an power, a social construct, but also a construct of power of racialization globally. But the distinction and the interesting part in the Romani history is that due to our diversity, including in phenotype, other indicators such as clothing and names and language have also been used for identification and racialization. Essentially, neither myth-crafting nor assigning negative traits to identity marker is an innocent stereotype. They are really major elements in this continuous process of racialization of Romani people.
It's important to remember that when Romani people were first coming into Europe, people didn't immediately see them and think, oh, these are Indian people. You have to remember, most Europeans have probably never even seen an Indian person in their life. However, they used the knowledge that they did have, because Romani people didn't come to Europe in a vacuum. They weren't the very first racial minority to enter Europe. So Europeans saw these dark-skinned people and associated them with other dark-skinned people that they have seen. For example, Egyptians, that's where the racial slur Gypsy came from, Nubians, and even Ethiopians. They applied the myths and stereotypes towards these people to Romani people. That's why when you look at anti-Blackness and anti-Roma racism, you'll notice a lot of very similar themes.
See many similarities between the narratives, the myths that have been constructed against Roma people and their similarity to narratives constructed about Jewish people, Black people, and so on. It's true that if you were to look at the history of Europe after Romani arrival, what you see is that very often when Roma people are described, they are described as Black. they are as Ethiopians. Ethiopians being, in a term used for Africans, philosophers, and there are these relations and these connections that you see everywhere. So many people were not of the 19th century as a category. But if you look at these theories, you will see that many philosophers, many writers would refer to Roma as Black people. So somehow Roma people are constructed as identity that is against whiteness.
Magda coins the term in her book Ufficialo tel Ciudipen as a Romani way of expressing these themes of anti-Roma racism, and to shy away from terms such as anti-Gypsyism and anti-Tsiganism, which are very common in a very high political context, especially in Europe. However, you may notice that these terms both contain racial slurs and may refer to other people groups as well. Gypsy, for example, a slur that was originally created for Romani people, has also been applied to people such as indigenous Irish travelers, all the way to people from India and sub-Saharan Africa. And also the word tsigan, meaning slave, has also been applied to other groups who were enslaved in the Romanian principalities as well.
I take distance from these widely used terms, anti-Gypsyism, anti-Tsiganism, and so on, and instead I use anti-Roma racism or anti-Romani racism as a frame. I saw it problematic because it literally meant that this form of racism was directed at all people perceived as gypsies. That's not only Romani people. And at the same time, the 2000s were a period when many of us in the Roma movement were very much engaged in advocating against the use of the racial slur gypsy in legal documents, particularly at the national level. If you think about Romania, there were many debates in the parliament about these two terms, Roma, which was our term, and the racial. I believe that it is white supremacy, not gypsiness, that is the core element of racist ideology. Second, when it comes to all those who are discriminated against because they are perceived as Romani or they are perceived as gypsies, but they do not have ethnic identity, heritage, and more so personal history and family history in this context, I think that they do face discrimination, and I know that they face discrimination, but that is discrimination by association, not racism. And Europe has quite a bit of a legal framework to address discrimination by association. Why I make this difference is because white Europeans are not part of a history of racism. They are not part of the continuities of the system of oppression endured by Romani people across generations, which essentially I see as the major feature of anti-Roma racism. Third, I think that the very construction of the term gypsy is imperial, is hierarchical, is racializing, and is repressive in nature. The empire invented the gypsy. We don't have to follow the language of the empire. And British canonical voices created the gypsy in a context of pre-existing politics of power, dehumanization, and oppression. So it's not the idea of a gypsy that leads to racism, but it's really this history of violence and oppression that informed the label gypsies. Oppression and violence came first. Labels came after. We know that Gajikane power structures had exploited and outcasted Romani people long before the gypsy emerged in the 1500s. In Romanian territories, we are talking about slavery in early 1300s. So that doesn't make much sense to me. But this negative counter identity was also relational and tied to colonial practices. You may know that British colonizers in India extended the term gypsy to Indian tribal communities with distinct histories, distinct languages, and cultures from Romani people.
The solution on how to fix anti-Roma hate in the future, as well as specific policies made for Romani people and by Romani people.
Thinking about Romani people when you create any policy, particularly mainstream policies, but who does that? So essentially, the question is who writes these policies? And I talk about Gajikane politics because most often these politics and these papers, these policies are written by Gaje for Gaje. So the realities and the histories of Romani people are not necessarily integrated in this big picture of policies. There are many issues to, one is the lack of power. So when we talk about racism, we are not talking just about stereotypes and discrimination. We are really talking about how power is distributed and why. And politics is, is really the space you can really see who has power, who has access to resources, and who writes. And we've never really been at the table. Sometimes we are tokenized in processes. Sometimes we are let at the table to add an element or two, but we've never really had power to take decision. And I'm not talking only about politics. I'm talking about knowledge production. I'm talking about arts, the media, and so on. So
Magda ends her book with a heartfelt letter to her nephew, something that both non-Romani people and Romani people need to hear.
And the book with the letter to my nephew, Matei. This is the first, that I wrote for this book, and this was written back in 2017 or so. So it's been a long road. The message is really straightforward, because what I want to convey is really what I wish I had known about racism during my childhood. And perhaps maybe I just read you a few sentences. You are a beautiful, kind, and intelligent adolescent, and you are not white or Gajo. You and all Roma children and adolescents deserve to understand racist behaviors in our country and on our continent before and when you encounter them, and give them meaning. You may find yourself isolated, unheard, and marginalized when you stand up and speak up. You may find yourself strategizing when to shine and when not to get noticed. You may find yourself to be perceived as too much by Gage. Do not be hard on them. They probably have not seen Roma people before, and even if they had, you would not fit into their mental image of the Roma. Meet them with love, but stand up for yourself and never give up your dignity, health, and honor for them. I did and I regretted. Do not become what the Gajikane world has set you to become.
Now, of course, this video was just an overview. If you want to learn more about this topic, I highly recommend buying Magda's book, The Permanence of Anti-Roma Racism, Unuttered Sentences. I've read it and I can highly recommend it. Also, this is just one perspective as well. I always recommend talking with Romani people and being in community with Romani people, hearing the different opinions from our group, because remember, we are a very diverse people. We are not homogenous in every way. There are different opinions. We do not all share one mind.
And review it, question it, critique it, because it's a theory. It's not the only one. And I do hope that people build on it, but also, deconstruct it, and so on. I welcome advice and I welcome critique.
I really hope you enjoyed this video, that it was valuable and you got to hear a Romani perspective on why this racism and this hate exists in our world today. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and Jadevlesa.